Hello, everyone. Welcome to the stream. I'm going to be reading past the Dissent, but this is just going to be a select paragraphs. Okay, I don't have the fortitude or my throat can't handle reading the whole book on stream. Okay, but this idea came from James Fauntleroy, Jaybe Faunt. I think he might have hit 5,000 subs on his YouTube channel. But Jaybe Faunt, guys, is part of the Revolutionary Blackout network, and I got inspired by him to do book readings on stream and posting it to my YouTube channel and other places. So, man, he's good. He reads like the entire book by chapter or parts by parts, the entire thing. But yeah, I just want to do kind of testing this stream out, and I just want to read, as you can tell, I want to read a dozen or so paragraphs, guys, and just kind of go in order from front to back. But Past the Descent, guys, edited by Andrew Basevich and Daniel Surgeon. I've seen Daniel Surgeon on the interwebs. I think he was on the Jimmy Dore show a couple times. So definitely has a lot to say about imperialism and America's wars in the West. But let's start off with the introduction by Andrew Basevich. And in this paragraph, he says, let's see, Positive Dissent offers insights into how and why recent U.S. military efforts have gone so badly astray. Flagrant malpractice by those at the top inflicted untold damage on the troops we ostensibly esteem, on populations U.S. policymakers vowed to liberate, and ultimately on our own democracy. The adverse effects of war are by no means confined to the immediate arena in which fighting occurs. And by their very nature, wars are complex. Authoritative truth regarding any war is necessarily hard to establish. Arriving at even an approximation of the truth requires tapping into varied and perhaps even contradictory perspectives. So, that was one paragraph I wanted to read. Just gonna kind of skip on through to my next little thing here. Mm-hmm. All right, here's one more paragraph from the introduction. Most Americans take it for granted that those serving in the armed forces of the U.S. are compliant, if not altogether politically inert. As a broad judgment, this is mostly correct, both individually and collectively. Excuse me. U.S. troops routinely demonstrate the discipline that is an essential predicate to even minimal military effectiveness. They obey orders and are reliably subservient to this chain of command. But mostly is not entirely, and the exceptions can be illuminating. That said, it is important to distinguish military dissent from other forms of protest. As used here, military dissent is not synonymous with opposition to war in general. For our purposes, military dissenters are serving soldiers or combat veterans who actively oppose military policy that they deem ill-advised, illegal, or morally inconsolable. So, yeah, guys, I'm not um, pro-military at all. But I picked this book up from the local library because I just wanted to, you know, guys that did have a light bulb that turned on and want to do their part in raising awareness, find it pretty important. So that's kind of why I'm reading this, and maybe you guys can come pick this book up. What's the next paragraph here? So, so this closes out the foreword, the beginning. In the modern era, all wars are alike in certain respects, but each has its own distinctive attributes. The terminology that recurs over and over again in America's post 9/11 wars, improvised italics, improvised explosive devices, traumatic brain injuries, post-traumatic stress disorder, hints at some of the qualities of those conflicts. So too does the epidemic of suicides among serving soldiers and recent veterans. But of greater significance still is the persistent indifference of the American people. This volume pulls back the veil on that collective indifference, allowing a diverse group of participants in those wars to reflect on all that has been lost and at what cost. The testimony of these military dissenters is of inestimable value. Like Ian Fishback, they deserve to be heard. And I believe this book is dedicated to him. This chapter is As American as It Gets by Eric Edstrom. He just arrived at boot camp. I was 17 years old, my first year at the academy. As for most of my classmates, was characterized by fear, intimidation, exhaustion, and infantilizing rituals. Early on, we were sent to Robinson Auditorium, Rob Out and cadet vernacular for a motivational spirit briefing. On the way, our cadet platoon sergeant, 2 years older than us, marched us to a cadence. Listen to this, guys. It's really troubling. Left, right, left, right, left, right, kill. Left, right, you know I will. I went to the mosque where all the terrorists pray. I set up my claymore and blew 'em all away. Left, right, left, right, left, right, kill. Left, right, you know I will. I went to the store where all the women shop, pulled out my machete, and I began to chop. Left, right, kill. Left, right, you know I will. I went to the playground where all the kiddies play. I pulled out my Uzi and I began to spray. Dude, really troubling. He continues, I didn't know what to make of it. Was it badass? Was I some kind of tough guy now? Across the path of stone pavers we reached Thayer Hall, a peculiar near-windowless building once used for equestrian practice, back when cavalry meant horses, not helicopters and armored vehicles. We were led inside and took seats in the auditorium. Severe-looking officers took turns mounting the stage. We didn't know who they were or what they did, but they radiated gravity. Authoritative presence. I wanted that. Quote, all of you who graduate from here will almost certainly be sent to war in Iraq or Afghanistan, said a lieutenant colonel, doing what appeared to be a rendition of the famous opening scene in Patton, the one where General Patton galvanizes his troops with a speech about going through the Hun like shit through a goose. The lieutenant colonel continued, quote, I want you to look within and ask yourself if you are willing to lead men and women in combat. It's not for everyone, and if you want to quit, do everyone a favor, just stand up and walk out of this auditorium right now. No one budged. So he continues on to rile them up. A lot of hoots and hoo-ahs from the new class of cadets, right? But then I'll continue. The lights dimmed. We heard the recognizable opening chorus of Bodies by Drowning Pool. Basically, the theme song for the War on Terror. Let the bodies hit the floor. Let the bodies hit the floor. The auditorium went wild. Ravenous screams. My skin turned to goose flesh. The hairs on my arms stood erect. The anticipation and adrenaline were amplified. This was what we had come here for. The video began. A highlight reel of death and destruction. Supernova nighttime explosions in an Iraqi city. M1 Abrams tanks rolling through Baghdad. Dismounted infantrymen patrolling dusty rubble-strewn streets. Communicating with hand and arm signals. An AC-130 Spectre gunship is flying a large orbit around its objective. A couple of sedans, in a beat-up pickup. A small assemblage of people stand jaw-jacking around them. So killable. Unbeknownst to them, they are seconds from death. The crosshairs are on them, center mass. The Bofors 40mm anti-aircraft gun begins pounding them literally to pieces. Through the thermal lens, a yard sale of body parts. The heat signature shows streaks of white, splashes of blood, and chunks of still warm flesh scattered around the engagement area. We cheered, practically frothing at the mouth. A man flees the scene, a squirter. He starts running. The gunner switches to the 20mm Gatling gun and hoses him down. A snail trail of blood. A video game, but not. The camera pans out, revealing a Jackson Pollock painting made of gore. Where was the popcorn? We were loving it. Finish him. And then it goes on, guys, to a different scene. The extreme psychosocial dynamics of America's military fetish do not translate to other public service professions. Imagine an alternate universe where the stories we tell one another are different, and it's the IRS agents who get to board the plane first. Maybe it's they who get to ask, as if entitled, for IRS discounts at chain restaurants and theme parks. People stop tax collectors in the street to thank them for their service. Just part of the job, ma'am. Quote, says one taxman, smug as hell. There are IRS Appreciation Day truck sales. Support the IRS bumper stickers. Taxes the price we pay for civilization, proclaims a t-shirt sporting an American flag with one money green horizontal stripe, a version of the Blue Lives Matter iconography. Just before kickoff at the IRS Bowl, tax collectors step up to the 50-yard line, pyrotechnics exploding in the background as 60,000 proud Americans rise to their feet and sing the national anthem. And when honest, salt-of-the-earth tax collectors pass away, after a lifetime of faithful service to our country, they receive a 21-gun salute and are buried with a copy of this year's federal budget, perfectly balanced. If serving as an IRS agent were the status job, if it received the same social perks as being in the U.S. military, maybe America would be better at collecting taxes. Maybe we would have more funds for development, infrastructure, education, healthcare, climate change mitigation, but we don't. Instead, the military is prioritized, and as a result, we have more shiny military toys and more unnecessary counterproductive wars. So I just wanted to read that excerpt because, dude, what is it? Since kindergarten, we do the Pledge of Allegiance, and we do it all through high school. It's just so strange, like that. He calls it the psychosocial dynamics of America's military. Like thinking of what if we did that to IRS, man? The way we treat the military. I thought that was a great paragraph. So this might get a little graphic. It's not really. It's what his friend did to himself. So at my first duty station in Fort Carlson, Colorado, while serving as the staff duty officer, I got a call in the middle of the night. A soldier had slit his wrist with a razor blade. His mutilated arms looked like a grid of bloody squares, lines going both vertically and horizontally, 6 inches up his wrist. He had not cut himself deep enough to end his life. When the military medics arrived, they expressed what I can only describe as mild irritation for getting the call. Come on, why would you play tic-tac-toe on your wrist with a razor? They acted as if they had dealt with this before. After the wrist-slitting event, the Army briefly put the troubled soldier in an inpatient mental health ward and gave him medications that, his father said, made him seem dangerously stoned. Quote, eventually, he was sent back to the unit. Missing from formation one morning, he was found dead in his barracks room. He had overdosed on the prescription drugs the Army gave him, plus a couple of his own. Not long thereafter, I received a call informing me that Sam, my close friend, from the crew team had been seriously injured by an IED in Afghanistan. Arriving at the intensive care burn unit in San Antonio, I saw him lying in bed. His lithe, 6 foot 4 inch frame was mummified in gauze. Only the portion of his body needed for intravenous tubes were exposed. He was nearly unrecognizable. Parts of his face were raw and marbled, as if a psychopath had flayed him with a cheese slicer and then worked him over with the blowtorch. His ears and nose were charred black, a stiff breeze would have made them crumble to dust. His lips were split, oozing a putrid brownish wax. He was covered in greasy ointment. Although his hands were bandaged like oven mitts, I noticed a missing finger. His resting heart rate was in the 130s, a constant jog to survive. Sam was a living revenant. Just one more paragraph. Foolishly, I had packed up my Xbox 360 and Call of Duty, hoping it would provide Sam with some entertainment and distraction during what I had soon would be a dull recovery process. In my mind, he'd be on a sofa somewhere, sipping milkshakes and being chastised for pushing the limits of his rehab, complaining that his run times were slipping. I felt like an idiot when it dawned on me that I had brought a video game console for a man whose fingers had been literally burned off and who lacked the strength to speak. So, sorry if that was a little too graphic, but I think the stories need to be told, guys. So I just found just forget how wounded and effed up these people are, man. And that was really shocking how um, the guy cut himself, slit his wrist, but then just decided Army's gonna like give him just painkillers, man, and looks like a really heavy dosage, man. Just made him catatonic. So, okay. One of my soldiers who was 18 years old when he deployed to Afghanistan killed himself not long after returning home. A reminder that suicide has been deadlier than combat for the military. There have been over 30,000 suicides among U.S. service members and veterans of the post 9/11 wars, significantly more than the roughly 7,000 service members killed in post 9/11 war operations. I think this was written in like 2019. Excuse me. I'll double check that, but I think 2019. So, all right, here's continuing this section. Another soldier from my platoon had been in and out of rehab for years. Hard drugs, alcohol, depression, the works. Whenever we speak on the phones, it seems like he is nursing a buzz. At his best, he's getting by. At his worst, we don't need to talk about his worst. As for A.J. Nelson, the soldier injured by a roadside bomb during our first week of deployment, the one who had wanted so badly to return to the platoon, he got his. Sorry, my bookmark's in the way. He got his wish. The military patched him up and sent him back to us 7 months later. He may have recovered from his physical wounds, but still, I was wrong. He was not going to be okay. In 2012, he had an accomplice kidnapped a stranger and rammed a crossbow bolt through his ear. When this failed to kill him, they choked him to death with a chain. After they chopped his body up in a bathtub, they used his car to rob a bank. Nelson is now serving life in prison without parole. It makes you wonder, were these accumulated traumas of the war in Afghanistan necessary to protect the national territory of the United States? No, no, they were not, he says. Man, that's just sorry for getting graphic, guys, but I mean, I feel like this has to be told, so. I kept tabs on my friends still in uniform and on the war itself. I was disappointed and sometimes aghast on what I found, at what I found. In 2016, 4 years after I had left the military, I learned that one of my friends, Andy, Captain Andrew Byers, had been killed in Kunduz, Afghanistan. The place where he died was not far from where the U.S. had bombed a Doctors Without Borders, I can't say the French word, hospital roughly a year earlier, killing at least 42 people, including numerous patients and staff. So I believe that was Obama's work there, guys. So, war criminal Obama. Andy was an exceptional and talented guy, a Green Beret detachment commander in the Special Forces. Reading about his death, I found two very different accounts of the facts. Okay, so I think he's going to talk about how the military lies. And an article from the U.S. Central Command titled Until Dawn, Surviving the Battle at Bose Katahari, a dramatic and romantic sounding name, provided a rah-rah account of the mission and contained many interviews with soldiers from Andy's team. Andy and a fellow Green Beret were said to have been killed in a mission to target known enemy safe havens and disrupt the refit ops of several high-level Taliban leaders. The article said that the U.S. Special Forces had inflicted catastrophic damage on multiple enemies. One Air Force combat controller attached to the unit was recommended for the Air Force Cross Medal for his actions, having spent the night calling in precision airstrikes on enemy positions. The mission that killed my friend was described as a bittersweet victory, and one Green Beret from Andy's team felt content with the effects that we had on the enemy that night. For their actions that night, members of the team were awarded 3 Silver Star medals, 3 Bronze Star medals, 2 with Valor, 4 Army Commendation medals with Valor, and 6 Purple Heart medals. Ah, here's the catch. He continues, articles in the New York Times and Al Jazeera told a very different story. The Al Jazeera article was titled U.S. Forces Admit killing 33 civilians in Taliban clash. One Afghan resident whose family was killed by the airstrike said that the attack only killed innocent people, whose houses were targeted based on speculation. Afterward, residents carried more than a dozen bodies, including children, towards a local governor's office in a show of anger. As deeply tragic as the death of American soldiers is, it's remarkable how the official Army account completely omits any mention of the 33 civilians killed by U.S. airstrikes during the battle, more than 15 times the number of Americans killed. To avoid moral dissonance, the military does not like to publish accounts that mix medals with valor and dead children. But the collateral damage made the circumstances of Andy's death all the more tragic. Dude, that's just that's how they lie to us, man. That's how they lie to us. So, Joy Damiani, I think she wanted to go as a journalist. And here we go. My job was to create a newspaper filled with the news of our victories. But on the last page of every issue, I typed a list of deaths. The official term, casualties, never felt sufficient to do justice to the growing number of names that had so recently belonged to so many living faces. The font size shrank in every issue, the list stretching into 2 and then 3 columns as the months heaved on. As directed, our public affairs. Hold on, let me get some water. Man, my throat's already tired. Drinking some lime cucumber water, guys. Alright. As directed, our public affairs team never used the word failure in print. Never hinted at the possibility that every. Alright, rip the page. Victory was actually a loss, and never ever technically lied. Military public affairs is a propaganda of omission. We, the government's very own uniformed journalists, didn't overtly fabricate. We just diligently told only the news deemed appropriate for team spirit. We painted only the pictures that generals wanted the troops to see. Resistance was not entirely futile, but it was swiftly punishable. Any attempt at sketching even a minimally accurate portrait of the daily chaos that we observed would be censored at best. Instead, we adeptly performed the moral contortions required to maintain a semblance of sanity, while spinning the yarns of winning we wrapped around our battle buddies' eyes. At times, not even noticing we'd gotten ourselves tangled up in them too. As instructed, anyone we detained became, in print, a detained insurgent. Our ever-expanding presence in Iraq was officially the theater of operations. Our actions, combat operations. Our mission, Iraqi freedom. We never used the word war, at least not outside the safe confines of its bookends. Global and on terror, because we had already won the war. What? What we were now engaging in was reconstruction. It would last as long as the commander-in-chief deemed necessary, we were told, and as long as it did, our team's task was to tell the story of victory. So, I just wanted to read that one, guys. Get a viewpoint of a writer in the war. This is Daniel L. Davis, this chapter, Going Public with the Truth. So, it wasn't long before my aggravation started turning to anger. In March 2011, I read about a fairly large battle that had taken place in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, near the Pakistan border and not far from where I had patrolled the previous month. It was known as Operation Strong Eagle 3. Public reports indicated it was one of the more intense battles in recent Afghan history, with the U.S. side suffering an uncharacteristically high casualty count, 6 dead and 15 or more wounded. The division commander, Major General John F. Campbell, told reporters that there had been large Taliban weapon caches near the site of the battle. Campbell said he knew this area had a number of insurgents in there, and that's why we were targeting this area, he says. The 101st Airborne troops were saddened by the loss of their fellow troopers, Campbell said, but they fought valiantly. They want to make sure their battle buddy didn't die in vain. And now, anyone who has seen American combat troops in action would not doubt the general's depiction of the troopers as fighting valiantly. The more research I did, however, the more I realized that contrary to Campbell's words, those lives had indeed been thrown away in vain. Okay? He's going to continue on. A mere 9 months before Operation Strong Eagle 3, I discovered another unit from the 101st Airborne had fought against the Taliban in almost the exactly the same location, with 2 American soldiers killed during the battle. In that earlier engagement, the Afghan army and police ran away almost as soon as the shooting started, leaving the fight to the United States alone. We defeated the Taliban fighters, built the Afghan security forces, an armored command post, and set them up to successfully hold the terrain after our departure. And yet, within weeks after we left, the Afghan forces abandoned the defensive positions we had purchased with the lives of 2 Americans because of rumors that the Taliban might return. By the time of Operation Strong Eagle 3, in other words, we knew that Afghan troops wouldn't hold the area after we attacked, so why in God's name did we go back in, throwing the lives of 6 more American soldiers into the dirt less than 3 weeks before the battalion was set to begin flying home? And as for the claims that the new mission was a serious setback for the Taliban, that our troops had found several large caches, those were hogwash. We had actually found surprisingly little. So he kind of goes on after that, but you kind of get the gist. That's why I wanted to choose that one. But just yeah, guys, just the confusion around these, what they're really doing out there, and they're just wasting U.S. men's life away, soldiers' lives away, guys. This chapter is by Urika Jayamaha, When Grunts Complain. And he kind of notes more about how the war is a failure. So, alright. After armor-piercing explosive was detonated between 2 Iraqi-controlled checkpoints, for example, killing 1 American soldier and critically wounding 2 others, local Iraqis readily told us that the Iraqi police and army officers had escorted the triggermen and helped plant the bomb. But these civilians couldn't alert us beforehand because the Iraqi army, the police, or the local Shiite militia would have killed their families. And such incidents were virtually routine. Our enemies were determined, our allies questionable at best, he says. And then he goes on to continue. Meanwhile, we noted. Let me see. Meanwhile, we noted the most important front in the counterinsurgency, improving basic social and economic conditions, is the one on which we have failed most miserably. There were 2 million Iraqis in refugee camps in neighboring countries, and almost 2 million more internally displaced, while cities lacked regular electricity, phone service, and sanitation. As for security, the fact that American observers can now safely walk down the streets of formerly violent towns was not the relevant measure. What the locals saw was a lawless environment, where men with guns ruled the streets, and simply engaging in the banalities of life was a death-defying act. When the primary preoccupation of average Iraqis was when and how they were likely to be killed, handing out care packages didn't do all that good. Didn't do much good. It all added up to a situation where the best thing for American forces to do was to pull back to the margins and develop a nuanced strategy to assist Iraqis so they would take ownership of the fight. We simply pointed out that the war as we saw it, so that others could think of the broader implications. This is Kevin Tillman, the brother of Pat Tillman. You guys remember Pat Tillman? I think he was a strong safety for the Arizona Cardinals football. And this is his brother. I didn't volunteer to risk my life for America only to have officials motivated by profit and power used me as a glorified state-sponsored terrorist, nor had I wanted to be cheered on by a manipulated, apathetic, and largely deluded citizenry. I felt then and now that Americans who volunteer don the uniform should know for certain that their service is being used to defend this country and further the good of humanity. Anything less is a betrayal of the service member. The betrayal became more personal after we'd redeployed to Afghanistan, where Pat was killed on October 22, 2004, in a friendly fire incident. The Bush administration didn't like the optics of a high-profile soldier like Pat, in a Ranger battalion no less, being killed by friendly fire. In addition, the Abu Ghraib prison scandal had just hit the headlines. I think I remember those screenshots, guys, like soldiers just torturing and laughing. Oh, sick photos. So the government lied to us, his family, and to the American public. Remember, this is his brother, Pat, with the manufactured story about him dying by enemy fire, then used him to promote more war. For maximum effect, they awarded him a Silver Star, one of the highest military honors. It was all based on fabricated witness statements and a false narrative. They didn't even bother to find out what courageous actions he actually took on the battlefield. Our family did not start getting even fragmentary versions of the truth until about a month later, and then in large part only because the coroner refused to sign the fabricated autopsy report. Damn. So, this is a really good chapter, guys, but uh, he goes on to talk about Jessica Lynch. They used her, they lied about her story and what she went through as a prisoner. So, and let me just read a couple more paragraphs. I've got maybe like, I'm already at the end of the book, technically, guys. So, just want to read a few more paragraphs. Do, 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 do. Belligerent U.S. foreign policy not only creates victims in other countries while getting our soldiers killed and injured, but inevitably reverberates at home, with violence and corruption replacing political process and the rule of law, with realities subverted by false narratives, with a flourishing of fear, ignorance, and hate. War dissenters understand this, historically and conceptually. That's why war dissent is reasonable, necessary, and morally sound. In some cases, depending on your ethical framework, it is even obligatory. Obligatory. Yeah, he goes on to say, dissenters get labeled by some members of the media and the general public as traitors, cowards, distinctly unpatriotic, smeared, man. Somewhere along the way, I encountered the phrases fraud, waste, abuse, and that seemed to fit the grotesque outlay of resources on the large bases where I spent time. As much as I appreciated our air-conditioned chow hall and the steak and the crab legs and the Mongolian stir-fry, I couldn't help thinking that it was all a bit much. Sometimes it felt less like a war than a giant boondoggle to benefit the big contracting companies like Kellogg Brown and Root. I thought it was peculiar that we had Sri Lankans working in our chow hall, Filipinos doing our laundry, and Turks handing out basketballs in the recreation center. It all seemed colonial and corporate, and I definitely found it repulsive that the American KBR employees were making 5 or 10 times my salary. It was only after I got home that I began to learn about the multi-billion-dollar no-bid contracts that companies like KBR received to provide logistics and construction services in Iraq. The debate back home about whether the war was just about capturing oil, Iraqi oil, was still simmering when I returned to college in 2005, but as far as I can see, any future oil contracts for American companies would be icing on the cake. The money was already in the bank from the logistical ops before the first boots even hit the ground, and it kept flowing for years, while more Americans died and got critically wounded, and Iraq was torn to shreds in the security vacuum created by Saddam's removal. So, yeah, I just wanted to read that, man. Just these blank contracts that these contractors get, these corporations, man. Um, And just how like Coca-Cola cans, it's like $10 a freaking can, you know? The private mercenary groups that are there, dude, getting paid like 5 to 10 times as much as regular soldiers. I might have told them that I never fired my weapon. That some days I wished I had, and other days I was almost more thankful for having never killed than for having survived. I might have told them about my best friend who shot and killed a civilian at a checkpoint in a moment of confusion, and how that one story seemed to sum up the entire war for me. And I might have told them about the mass grave site where I worked for a month providing security while forensic pathologists exhumed the remains of Kurds murdered by Saddam's henchmen. I might have told them about how the bodies buried in the dry soil of Iraq for 15 years had become almost mummified, and how the remaining moisture in their skin filled the air with the unmistakable odor of decaying flesh. Some of the men were in their suits as if they dressed up for the occasion or of being thrown into the back of a truck and carted out to the barrens to be shot. The women were swathed in abayas and floral print dresses. One of them had a baby in her arms. They all had small holes in the back of their skulls. Jesus. Well, there you go, guys. I got this Pass of Dissent from my local library. I'm going to take out. So you see my little post-it notes, guys, are little dogs. Little dogs. So let me take them out for the next reader who comes to check out this book. But yeah, man, Andrew Basovich. Sorry if I butchered that one. Danny Surgeon. But so it was a good read, man. My first book of 2025. I probably read like 2 books last year, guys. Maybe 3.